Well, welcome. We're back to PACA II here, the end of March in 2026. And we've got a guest today that needs very little introduction other than his name. And that is in track and field coaching world, whenever you say boo, it's not trying to scare you, it's trying to educate you. And that's Boo Schexnayder. And we appreciate his time today and really are happy that we could fit in his schedule, because he's a busy man for sure, as we all are at this time of year. So, Boo, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Well, Boo, you've worked at all levels. You've worked college, high school, professional, Olympics, all over the place. And even though you're primarily thought of as a jump coach, I feel you're just a coach and that you know all of the different components, whether it be the sprints, the strength level, and everything else that's involved. And so I did ask our guests if they would give me some ideas of topics, because it's hard to narrow you down to just a topic or two. So the feedback I got was that they wanted to get some input from you on the horizontal jumps, and then some of the traditional aches and pains that a lot of our athletes are feeling this time of season, as far as like shin splints, hamstring, et cetera, et cetera. And I know from taking the strength and conditioning class with you this winter that you've got some unique ways to rehab and be proactive in maybe avoiding hamstring and shin splints. So that's great. But before we start with all of that, how did you get into track? Because I don't think you were a trackster growing up, were you?
I was a decent javelin thrower in high school. I think I threw 189 or something like that, and I liked track, and that was about it. And I was much more of a football player. What's odd is sometimes your greatest curse becomes your greatest blessing. But I went on and I was coaching high school. I was coaching football. I was a defensive coordinator, and I was coaching track. Our teams were doing well in both sports, and I kept getting these offers to coach collegiate football at low levels, and but the jobs weren't paying a lot more than what I was making, and I was pretty happy. And so I didn't really think that was something that I wanted to do. Well, along comes a new principal at my school, and it's one of these principals that doesn't like sports, and maybe if you've coached high school, you've been there, but this principal doesn't like sports. And the very next person who called me with the collegiate opportunity was Coach Sylvia to go to the junior college in Texas to coach field events for him. So I went. So that's how I really got into track and out of football completely, to be honest with you. That was 1989 or not, no, maybe 1990, I think, somewhere around there.
So football was the first goal, and
Hmm.
we
That's
have
how I
our
learned, right? So I learned not to train athletes.
yeah. Well, we're glad the principal turned you off of football, I'll tell you that. So
Oh, thank you. It
what
all
took
turned out pretty good for me.
yeah, definitely. What took you toward the jumps then?
Honestly, when I was a high school coach, I developed a reputation as a jump coach simply because I had a few talented athletes. You never have enough talented athletes. And it was a simple high school coaching decision. Like if I put them in the sprints, that's where everybody's putting their best athletes. But if I take these athletes and put them in the jumps and in the hurdles, coaching might make a little bit more of a difference in that regard, and I can get a little more points out of them. So my best athletes were in the jumps, so people started calling me a jumps coach. So, and that's kind of how I got a reputation as a jumps coach. Obviously, if you've ever, all of you who've seen me, you know I don't look like I was a jumper by any means.
Yeah, that's why when I walk in and say I'm a high jump coach, they kind of take a second glance at that too.
But doesn't it make you learn that event more when you didn't do it? Yeah,
It
you see that a
definitely
lot in sports, actually.
I
Mhm.
think, because in going through all these different pack of calls, I know your background, Clifford Velto wasn't a track athlete extraordinaire. A lot of our quote good coaches did not have a stellar athletic background, and that, like you say, you had to learn it just from scratch, and so you didn't have the talent innate. So that is a definite difference for us. What would you say some of your greatest influences in your coaching philosophy have been? Boo? Oh no, did he freeze?
Yeah, looks like he froze.
Okay, goodness. Well, I'm not
Oh,
thinking freezing
you
here.
froze up, I think. I
There you are.
apologize.
Yeah, there you're back.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah. But you
So
know what you say is so true. And you know, sometimes the best athletes, I frankly, I feel that if you're an elite athlete, you know, you're kind of used to taking from your coaches and your trainers and so forth. And it's a longer trip to become a good coach because you got to flip that switch from being a taker to being a giver. And that can be tough sometimes, you know. And what's
there,
Mhm.
just the opposite, it seems like if your parents were coaches, it gives you a big head start in the profession because
interesting.
you kind
Interesting.
of get it, you know, for some reason. So of course
Were
there's
your
always exceptions.
parents in education or teaching at all?
I had a lot of family members who were, my parents weren't, but I had a lot of teachers in my family. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Who were some of your greatest influences on your coaching philosophy?
Oh gosh. Really, I have to go as far as outside of the technical things, I really have to go back to my high school coaches. You know, they were people who made athletics a good experience for me, and they also kind of made me or helped me to understand that athletics could be a good tool for the development of a young person as a person. So I kind of started understanding at a young age that sports were really good for kids, whether you were really good at them or not. And that kind of shaped me to some extent where I always wanted kids to not only win, but I wanted them to have good experiences with me. Good experiences, not necessarily meaning that everything was always hunky dory and we always got along, but you came out a better person than you went in. And I just, you know, that's something that I think is very important. But it really goes back to my high school coaches in my formative years. I think everybody knows that my key technical mentor was Dan Path. You know, he
Mhm.
and I met when Dan came to LSU, like in the early 80s. I guess this was probably like 83 or 84, working on foot
Uh-huh.
like a whole weekend working on a football game plan, but it took me only about 10 minutes to plan track practice. And I thought something's not right there. It should be a little tougher than that. So I started driving up there and listening, and he was very helpful to me. And that's what kind of got me going from a technical standpoint.
That's interesting, yeah, because technique is so important, whether you as a coach you have to learn it from grassroots up, and yet then how do we explain it to like high school kids or a young college athlete? How have you kept it, let's say, simple but still technical in working with young athletes?
My mission is to simplify everything as much as possible. In spite of the fact that, you know, because of my reputation, people may think differently. I really try to make it as simple as possible. I learned teaching in classrooms that you have to give people like a few things you can really hang your hat on, you know, and I always felt that I wanted my athletes to understand that to succeed in long jump or high jump or triple jump or whatever the event, there were like three or four key things that you really had to do. And one of the things that Dan helped me understand real early in my career was that there's a difference between technique and style. You know, technique are the things that you have to do, and style are the things that you have kind of have an option on. There are different ways of doing it, you know.
Hmm,
So he kind of drilled that into my head, and I kind of ran with that, and that was what really helped me. But again, it's about making things as simple as you possibly can. To be honest with you, you know,
right.
I always felt that a lot of times when you look at an athlete that has five or six or seven key things they're doing wrong, there's normally one gatekeeper. You know, the one thing that kind of is, if you fix that one thing, five or six of the others are probably going to fall into place. And that's what I try to do is find the right key.
So when you first meet an athlete or observe them, what are those different steps you look for? What are you looking for initially?
Well, I just look at the way they move, to be honest with you, and I look for movement faults. But I'll be very frank with you, Sue. I'm very different than a lot of people in that I have confidence in my early phases of training. And I feel that if you have movement issues or if you have mobility restrictions or things like that, I feel like I can pretty much just plug you into what I do and it's going to help in that regard. And I think that the first block of training for any coach at any time is not just about development, it's also about fixing movement issues, and it's therapeutic to some extent. All coaching
Hmm.
to some extent is therapeutic or therapy based. So I don't really like look at how they move and then go about devising a plan. I've got a lot of confidence in the plan and I kind of plug them into what I do. And what typically happens is a lot of the bad stuff kind of disappears real quick. And then the stuff that lingers, then that becomes our target. So I don't really try to target certain things right away. I try to wait and kind of get some training under their belts before we actually start to have more targeted kinds of interventions.
Hmm. Well, let's shift into the horizontal jumps then, since that was one of our coaches' requests here. Um, how do you break down if somebody comes to you and I want to be a long jumper, I want to be a triple jumper, how would you set up their program, or what do you look for first?
Well, what if I'm looking for the talent levels to be successful? I look for two things. I look for speed and I look for elasticity. You can if I had I remember when I was a high schooler, I was playing pickup basketball, and during the pickup basketball, we were kind of horsing around, and I jumped up and I grabbed the rim, and the basketball coach saw me. So he called me over to the side and he made me jump and touch the wall, and there were tapes up there. And then he made me jump, land, and jump again. And my tape was about maybe 18 inches below everybody else's. So I could jump once, but I couldn't jump twice.
Hmm.
That rebound was not something that I was good at. And then he sent me back to the pickup game. He didn't. But my point is, I learned at a young age that elasticity is something and it's different than explosiveness or power or even speed. So that's the kind of stuff that I really look for as far as the talent ability is concerned. As far as like plugging them into a program or whatever, it's pretty much 90% running mechanics, acceleration mechanics, and sprint mechanics, and jump fundamentals. When I say jump fundamentals, I mean basic ground contact patterns, swinging the the free leg correctly, proper radius of swing leg, making sure the swing magnitude and the displacement match, things of that nature. So
Hmm.
there's far more about the fundamentals than there is about the actual specific technique of any of the jumping events.
So the running mechanics are crucial for any athlete that you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where you really start. And, when you're working with younger athletes, a lot of times, if you just get the running mechanics correct, everything will kind of fall into place quite often, but that
Hmm.
never happens when you got a bad run. Bad run,
And
you're always fighting uphill. Yeah,
right.
as you know, as you know.
Yeah, well, a lot of our coaches here are a little bit of a combination of high school coaches and then uh, coaches at the collegiate level. And one thing I've heard is college coaches say, well, we've got to retrain these kids when they come. They're not coming with good running mechanics. As a high school coach now, what would your suggestion be to what are the key things you want to focus on so that I send a good jumper to college?
Yeah,
Technically.
I don't necessarily think that high school coaches do such a poor job of teaching running mechanics. In fact, I know a lot of them try hard. But what I think that a lot of high school coaches do is they're fighting uphill with kids who don't have much movement experience and haven't taken PE and just don't have the basic movement skills per se.
Hmm.
So, I if I was, coaching high school again, I would probably be investing tons of time in simple circuit training and movement based types of stuff to supplement the track and field piece because I really think that a lot of the high school coaches are really battling bad running mechanics. It's more about mobility restriction and imbalances and things of that nature that are actually producing the bad mechanics. I mean, how can you have 10 athletes in your group and you teach running mechanics and eight get it and two just don't get it at all? It's not that you coach too poorly, it's that those have additional baggage.
Hmm. Right, right. Yes, I'm deal with that daily on that level. So when you're setting up an approach for a beginning long or triple jumper, how do you formulate that? What's your protocol?
Well, I think the decision about how many steps you're going to run is a critical one. Sometimes I think the coach kind of says, we're going to line up about here and see what happens. But I really believe that there's a particular velocity threshold that you want to happen, So when I'm looking at middle schoolers at 14 or high schoolers at 16 or collegiates at 18, those are important numbers to me. So that being said, that's kind of a critical decision. Not that you have to get it right away, but you want to be in the ballpark for sure. And the other piece is that I try to establish at least some decent running mechanics and some understanding before we ever get on the runway. Now, at the high school level, I can't afford to spend a month just doing accelerations on a track before we get onto the runway. Not only is that, not only do you not have the luxury of time, but most of your high school long jumpers will quit if you wait a month before you get them on the runway. But I do like to at least establish some kind of terminology and some kind of understanding of sprint mechanics. And I do try to establish basic approach distances and check mark distances on the track as opposed to the to on the runway itself. The board and the sand are very they're distractions, I guess, when you
Exactly.
first get started. So I remember as a high school coach, like every athlete I had in every jumping event on the back stretch of my track, I had a set of tape marks down there where they could do approach runs on the track at any particular time. And I don't really do that at the college level, but we still start there on the college level. And even when I inherit a high level athlete, sometimes I just don't take it for granted. I'll put them on the track and we'll do some work on the track. And I just want to make sure that the approach that they think is a good approach for them actually does fit what they're capable of doing.
Do you have them take off when they're doing an approach, or do you just have them run the 16 steps or whatever?
For the first few sessions, they may not take off, but after that, there's always a takeoff.
And why
After
is
that, there's
that?
all. Well, I think that we kind of a lot of jumps coaching schools, we kind of think that if we practice our steps and then we do short run jumps, well, we've covered everything. But you really haven't. The velocities associated with full approaches are significantly higher, and you see breakdowns there that you're not going to see sometimes at short approach work or whatever. So after we get past those initial stages, just about every approach run that they do is going to, in the long jump for sure, is going to be it's going to be there's going to be a takeoff involved with it.
Mhm.
And there are days when we do full approach takeoffs, and the takeoff is the focus.
That's good to hear, because that's one thing I'm always on the kids about, is to take off, because there is a different preparation. Even a small one, with even a youngster, when they take off versus just running through. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
changes that board definitely.
No, you're right. You can't depend on your short run jump or your pop ups or whatever to translate.
Yeah.
The velocities are too different. They're great, to teach skills and establish terminology and get started, but ultimately they're not enough. One of the things about horizontals is that I always felt that 12 or 13 steps was a critical threshold. Like if we did jumping in training at 12 to 13 steps, like full jumps from 12 to 13 steps, I felt that that was close enough where it's going to kind of translate into the meat. But anything less than that, I didn't find translated into the meat much at all. I'm not saying that you're wasting time doing that stuff, because we would do shorter stuff to get ready for the 12s and the 13s. But my point is that if all you're doing is kind of like thinking about all these pop-ups, we covered the takeoff because we did these 8-steppers, that just isn't sufficient.
Hmm. That's a good point, because it's kind of like the relay handoff. So if they just work a little short range, the velocity you're coming in is totally different than after you've run the full relay leg. And
Yeah,
so that's what
I'm
you're
sorry.
doing here.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same for every event, even in sprinting. I mean, every one of you has some athlete on your team who does all the sprint drills correctly and sprints like crap, and it's because of that disjointed, different velocities. And actually, they're organized in different parts of the nervous system, to be honest with you. The movements are organized differently.
How do you work on consistency with young jumpers?
Well, obviously, repetition is the mother of consistency, but Another part of it is to diagnose exactly where your athlete is most likely to go wrong. And I think that sometimes when athletes become inconsistent, we just use blanket statements like they were all over the place, and we never actually diagnose what is the specific thing that they ultimately did. I've always felt that most jumpers, horizontal jumpers in particular, there's two key areas that really, well, actually three key areas that really change. The first one is the first three steps, the push out of the back, will tend to get smaller or faster. The what I call I'm a little different, but what I call transition, like steps 4, 5, 6, often change quite a bit. And I'll find that often athletes will be over pushing, and they'll, instead of starting to get frequency going on schedule, they will actually extend the drive phase too deep, and you see that transition phase there. And then the last piece is the last few steps of the board, where you'll start to see alterations in stride frequency. Some kids feel like they need to create frequency in the last few steps, where I would argue that frequency has already been developed and it's time to live with what you've done. So those are the three areas that I really look at. And depending upon who you are, typically we're fixing in or honing in or cueing in on one of those particular areas.
Well, let's take each of these areas. So, like the beginning three steps, what are your cues or what do you want your jumpers to key on or to feel?
Strong peer push.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Okay, Boo, we're losing you again. Let's
I'm,
see.
I'm hearing you fine, but I'm saying strong peer push.
Strong peer push.
Pure, Pure, pure.
Pure. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, strong
Okay.
peer push, meaning like you don't have, we're not accelerate, you don't just push, just develop momentum. That's my cue for the first three steps. So you get three steps of pure push, what I call
Okay.
pure push. And then after that third step, that's when I want to see frequency increase. So I use real simple terminology like push for three and then get it going. Get it going means that we start to increase frequency. What I
Mhm.
find happens a lot nowadays is that athletes take that pure push way too deep into the run. Back, I mean, you know this, and you'll probably agree, but I remember back in the 80s, like everybody was too fast in the back. And then we started understanding you had to push out the back and develop momentum and whatever. It's shifted the other way, where everybody now is over pushing and taking
Mhm.
the drive phase far too deep into the run. And so kids are having problems getting their hips underneath them. Kids are having problems achieving the postures that you want. And as a result, they'll hit jumps. You still get some good marks, but you get way more fouls than you would get ordinarily. And like when the coaches are fussing about athletes fouling and frustrated by it, a lot of times it goes back to that over pushing. You know.
It goes back
So,
to the way they start the approach, not
yeah.
so much what they're doing at the end.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
in
One athlete that I coached recently over the last few years, Quenisha Burks. She wouldn't mind me telling you this,
Mhm.
but if you ever watch Quenisha Burks in international competition, she jumps behind the board probably 80% of the time. Like won't touch the board. She'll go like two competitions and not touch the board. And the and this will kind of point out what I'm saying here about the over pushing. Her tendency is not to push for three, but to push for like eight or so. And she's a good enough athlete that she understands if my hips are not under me, I can't take off. So what'll happen is she'll over push. And then at the end of the run, to get her hips underneath her, she'll have to quicken up a lot. And when you quicken up, your strides get shorter. So she's always behind the board. And then coaches will say, oh, Quenisha, you need to push harder because you were behind the board. But she's already over pushing.
Mhm.
Whereas when she's in my company, I'm reminding her, hey, after three steps, you better get your turnover going. You see, so the whole distribution of the approach run is a very fickle thing. And a lot of times these foul issues and behind the board issues and whatever, they're related to the rate at which we develop frequency because that's integrally related to how you establish postures.
So you want the frequency to start, let's say, on step four.
Yeah, that's when we start to really feel like
Yeah.
we're starting to sprint. And I would argue that from step 4 onto the board, the rhythm of a long jump approach is identical to the rhythm of 100 meters. The first three steps might be a little slower, but from that point on, it's pretty much like a 100-meter rhythm. to be honest
Mhm.
with you. And that's kind of how I cue it. Yeah.
And the hip importance, I think we lose that a lot, that
Yeah,
it's not, they don't get the hips under them until maybe, like you say, at the very end, and then it's chop, 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 trying to get in that position.
that's correct. Every step you take has an ascent. I mean, you go up in the air and you have a descent. If and when your foot hits the ground, that stops the descent.
Hmm.
So if the next step is late, then the descents become dominant. So you can never really get up tall and running in that regard. So hopefully that makes sense. But I just go back to, and I might be off on my numbers a little bit, but I remember when I was in an NCAA meet and I saw guys, young men, who were jumping less than 8 meters. Some of them were running 160, 170 feet, jumping less than 8 meters. And I remember Carl Lewis was running like 22 steps and he was only at 160. So we kind of trended in a bad direction, I think, in that regard. And when I
Right,
talk to the coaches about it, well, they like to do this, they like to do that. Well, I understand, but like, who's the coach?
right. They
You're
don't,
you're the one that's supposed to have the deeper understanding of the physics of this stuff.
exactly. Al, you've got a question?
Boo, don't you think that what you're talking about, horizontal jumps, you're finding in the 4x1s? That's the biggest
Um,
one.
well, I don't deal with 4x1s nearly as much, but yeah, I see a lot of it. I see it in sprints, to be honest with you. So lots of athletes overextend in the first couple of steps and whatever, and enjoy or suffer from those same kind of problems. So I'm not going to really jump in and be and wholeheartedly say yes because I just don't watch those events quite enough. But I do see it in the sprints to some extent. Yeah.
So then in our middle phase now, so step four on, you say you want that to be just go for it type of thing, right? What
The
are your cues there?
first three is what I call pure push. The next three is get it going. Then from that point on, the cue is push up, meaning I want them to feel like every time that foot hits the ground, they're not pushing themselves forward down the running way, they're pushing themselves up into the air. Because I'm trying to set up an undulation, like a
Right.
vertical bounce, so to speak, that we can ultimately modify into takeoff. And
Mhm.
so that's it, pure push, then get it going from the turnover standpoint, and then push up for the remainder of the run. And any mistakes that you might see in the tail end of the run, as we approach the board, those are basically going to be corruptions of what you've done earlier. The mistakes, I guess that's the next one we'll talk about is, the last four steps of transition where you run into problems. But to me, the two big problems that I see in transition, generally speaking, and my athletes do them too sometimes, so I'm not pointing fingers, but the first one is we fail to push up, meaning that as we get close to the board, instead of pushing up with the steps, we start pushing out with the steps. And when you start pushing out with the steps, you lose flight and you get forward. And as a result of that, you typically stick out the feet. And that's often when you get these crazy little half-inch fouls that drive everybody batty and things of that nature. And the other one and to me, this is more prevalent at the high school level, is just athletes who work the last uh, four steps too hard, meaning that there's just literally too much turnover. They've been told not to slow down at the board so much that they're actually overworking those last few steps. Conceptually, what I'm teaching my athletes to do, if you're running, say, 18 steps, conceptually, I want you basically accelerating for 14. And I want you to think of those last four steps as more about positioning your body in order to set up and take off correctly, more so than trying to continue to accelerate. Now, I'm not saying that you're not accelerating some on your fourth to last and your third to last step. You are. But my point is that you're trying to cram a lot of abrupt acceleration in there, you're going to be out of jumping positions. So I think that that's very important, understanding the idea of getting the acceleration and the work done early so you can relax those last few steps. Because I just see athletes that are far too many are just working those last few steps too hard. And as a result of it, the ranges of motion are decreasing, postures are getting worse, and they're not being elastic in those last few steps. And you also have to kind of do that when you're practicing. Like if you're doing 8-step pop ups, athletes need to understand we can't have 8 steps of drive phase in an 8-step run. It's gotta, it's gotta be like 2 or 3 steps. You devote 2 or 3 steps to kind of pushing, and then you have to get you have to learn how to distribute your practice run just like that. You know, you know that's
Exactly.
you know, that's something I see happen in triple jump all the time because every, I'll have I'll have at least 50 emails a year from coaches who call me or email me, and my triple jump jumps from 10 steps in practice or 8 steps in practice, the same distance that they jump in the meet from a full run. And the reason why has to do with how you distribute that practice run. If you're a triple jumper in a track meet, when you put your foot on the board, that shin is vertical. That shin is in a vertical position when you put your foot on the board. And the next thing that happens, that shin rotates forward and then you push off. And that's what a good triple jump takeoff looks like. Well, if in practice you have 8 steps of drive phase and you arrive at the board with the shin already tilted, that athlete never learns that they have to rotate that shin, you see, and that's a crux in the triple jump that I see time and time and time and time again, and it frustrates the heck out of coaches, but that's the reason why they haven't invested the proper amount of time in teaching the athletes how to distribute the practice run, the run that they're actually practicing from.
So how would you set that up for a triple jumper then? What cues or yeah, cues that you would use for a triple jumper then?
Like in a short run jumping
Yes.
environment, yeah, I just make them understand that your drive portion is only 1/3 of your approach.
Hmm.
So if we're running 8, like I want you to put the pushing up phase, like that's got to be happening by step 4 at least.
Right.
And whereas some athletes, they just don't ever get to that point. They just continue to kind of show acceleration mechanics throughout the whole thing.
So the cues that you used for long jump with that in the approach at the beginning, is that what you would use for triple also?
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly the same. Absolutely no difference. Mhm.
Now, when you get to the long jump, because I know their takeoffs are going to be a little different here, long and triple. Our long jump takeoff, as we get through penultimate and all of this, how much do you stress penultimate for a high school kid?
Well, it depends on the kid, to be honest with you. Like I've had kids who've come out for track, who've played basketball and have lots of jumping experience that have perfect penultimates and you never have to say a word. And
Mhm.
then I have some that were like gymnastics people who always ran on their toes and they're totally clueless. So I think it's something that you have to do. I don't think you can be successful without understanding or a basic understanding of how to set up your jump per se. And I get arguments about this, to be honest with you, from certain coaches or whatever, but the biomechanics are very simple. If you haven't lowered your center of mass a little, then you don't have a path over which to apply vertical force. Now, do some athletes lower too much? Yeah, and that's a problem. Do some athletes slow down excessively when they lower? Yeah, that's a problem. But that doesn't deny the biomechanical truth that you have to do this. So basically, again, penultimate, I'm basically breaking it down into 2 things. Number one is the heel to toe rolling action. I want to make sure that I see the entire surface of the foot rolling against the ground, kind of like a rocking chair does against your floor. And then the other piece of it is the lowering piece. And I want to make sure that once that penultimate grounds, that I see them moving down and forward at that point and not going directly downward. I see a down and forward, which is more consistent with preserving the velocities and that type of thing. So what I see happening in long jump a lot, Sue, and this is kind of advanced, but it's what I see happening a lot, is a lot of athletes who come to the penultimate step and they'll lower, but before they exit the penultimate step, they've actually pushed back up again. So yeah, they had that lower, but then they're back up in the air. So when they get to the board, they don't have the benefit of lowering because the lowering that they actually performed is gone at that point, and they end up slapping at the board. And again, those are typically foulers and things of that nature too. So
How do
I
you
think
coach that then?
what I do is I teach them that perceptually, that down and forward direction that I told you about the lowering. I want them to feel like they continue to stay low until until the hips are over the board. So
Okay.
I have them visualize and follow a path of the center of mass where they go down and forward. And then after they go down and forward, they travel level but low, level but low.
There you go.
And if I have somebody that just doesn't get it, I'll tell them to hit your lowest point on top of the board. Now that's not what happens, but that's an over cue or a radical cue, and
Hmm.
that can be effective with some people. But I think you have to be able to coach that. To be honest with you,
Yeah,
like there's two kind of mechanics: those that can just change oil and change an air filter, and there's those that can actually break down the carburetor. And sometimes in long jumping, you gotta get your hands a little dirtier than just like getting them on the board and hoping good stuff happens.
exactly. Well, we had Carl Lewis on a few years or so ago, and he said the coaching the penultimate and through those last few steps is our biggest deficit, shall we say, in the US. That's what he feels.
You know
And
what's funny is Coach Tellez. Like Coach Tellez was always funny about this. I guess he felt maybe some coaches shouldn't know about whatever. But like if you ask Coach Tellez about the penultimate, a lot of times he'll tell you, "Oh, don't mess with it. It's natural. It's don't mess with it. Don't mess with it. Whatever." And he gave me that same line. And then I started asking him more intricate questions. And once he kind of understood that, like, I kind of knew what was going on, then he started opening up to me about the penultimate step and the
hmm,
cues and everything. So it's just funny how he would have, that wall up at first. And then
yeah,
once you kind of got in a little deeper, the wall came down and he was willing to talk to you about it and stuff.
exactly, exactly. Well, once they have taken off or they're on the board and their hips are, over the takeoff, their hips are over their foot. Now,
Mhm.
what is the cue to take them
Just
through
push,
the takeoff?
just push, nothing, just push up.
Just push up again.
Yeah, that's the easy part. That's the natural part. The thing
Okay.
you have to be careful of, in my opinion, is that they don't go up too early. Like sometimes they'll remember when you put your foot down in long jump, the foot is a little bit in front of you. All right, it is. All right, yeah. Does that cause velocity? Yeah, there's a bit of a trade-off there, but yes, it is a little bit in front of you. And sometimes what you'll see is athletes will put the foot down and they immediately start to go up. You don't want to do that. You want to kind of continue to move horizontally and you don't want to go up until you've actually gotten over the takeoff foot. So all of the rise happens in front of the board, in front of your foot.
Hmm.
And that's a common mistake. I call that premature jumping when
Yes.
I
Yeah.
see them go up early like that. So the
And
whole idea is to keep the horizontal going as late as you possibly can.
that's good because that is another thing that Carol Lewis shared as to
Mhm.
working through that. And so it's fun to hear this from you too. So now if
Well,
we
ultimately, I'm a Coach Tellez disciple from Technique, second generation. So
well, he's awesome with that, definitely, definitely. So now if we transfer to the triple, what now, how is this different? Because now in triple, we don't really key on a penultimate, do we?
no, we don't, and it's a fault to lower excessively in the triple jump. Some people especially elite men, they'll gather up just a little bit. You'll see a little tiny bit of penultimate mechanics because they're kind of setting up a bigger extension of the board, and that's fine. But you shouldn't see any radical penultimate mechanics or any radical lowering or anything like that. I don't know that triple jumpers run off the board. They kind of push off the board, but they do run onto the board. So there are far, far, far more triple jumpers who are over preparing than under preparing. I guarantee you that much. So
Hmm.
it's very. So what I'm basically trying to do in triple jump is I'm just trying to get them onto the board as clean as possible. Meaning, as little setup, as little deceleration, as little deviation of everything as possible. I don't want to see a lot of radical arm movements before they get to the board or any of that kind of stuff. I just want them to get onto the board in a good, clean position. Once they're on the board, to me, the thing that becomes very important that a lot of people miss is the shin rotation. We talked about it a little bit earlier. It seems that many triple jumpers, and maybe if you're not coached, that's what you do naturally. But once that foot's on the board, you kind of try to just get through it and go. But that's not really what needs to happen. When that foot hits the board, your shin is typically in a vertical position, an upright position, unless you slow down in an upright position. And that shin has to rotate forward a bit before you push. So the idea of allowing the shin to rotate a little bit to load the quad and establish the correct takeoff angle and put a premium on the hip extension, that's a big deal to me. And I always felt it was worth at least 2/3 of a meter if you did that correctly.
Mhm.
So in short, it's just about being patient at that point and allowing your hips and everything to continue to travel forward. You need to get out kind of past your toe before you actually push, because if you do it that way, everything else for the hop phase pretty much just kind of falls into place.
This whole concept of patience, even though we're saying run off and accelerate and so on, that's where I see kids having trouble as to because those are kind of opposite thoughts. Do you have any words of wisdom on how to teach patience through these phases?
Yeah, well, not a magic bullet thing, but one of the things that I talk to about athletes all the time, whether they're sprinting, jumping, or whatever, is that remember, athlete, when you do it correctly, it doesn't feel faster, it feels slower. Okay. Like if you're a sprinter and you're pushing up with your steps, you have a little more air time. The stopwatch says faster, but you actually feel slower because of the added air time, you know. Think about it. If you're a triple jumper, if you're a good one, the phases come slow. They don't come fast.
Mm.
So I'm constantly having athletes understand, trying to help them understand that, like you're locked into this high speed or high frequency thing, and it's not until you break that and you kind of understand that things should feel a little bit slower that you really are going to be able to do what you're supposed to do in this event. We've all been to the high school meet where the kid who runs with their feet as fast as they can, and they always have a real short jump, whereas the kid that has nice big open strides, you know, has a nice big open jump. So you see that all the time. But the kid, a lot of kids think that if my feet are moving fast, I'm fast. That's not true. They have to understand that from Jump Street right away that that's not correct.
Exactly, exactly. So then, so you said the hop pretty much happens if the shin rotation, and then how about transition hop to step?
Well, there's one piece of the hop that I don't think is natural that I want to talk about, if you don't mind,
Oh,
and
please.
that's what the free leg does. Like
Yes.
when they're coming off the board, I am very concerned about what the free leg does. Not many people worry about it or look at it, but I want that free leg to do a kind of a hitch kick to some extent. It doesn't have to keep in mind, everybody, we're not talking about the jump leg, we're talking about the other leg. I want to see that free leg extend to some extent, and I want to see it move backward. Many triple jumpers, they'll be overly active with the hop leg because they're inactive with the free leg. So that's my next thing that I teach is I always want to make sure that they're moving that free leg backward and hopefully extending it to some point. That to me, that's something that a lot of them miss. I see somebody's texting in the chat. I like full extension of the free leg. Full extension is great, but sometimes athletes that are real young might not quite have enough flight time to extend completely. So I'll compromise a little bit with the more developmental ones possibly. But full extension is like your long-term goal
Mhm.
if you get that done.
Are there drills that you could suggest that would help the youngsters or the developing triple jumper get these positions?
I like to do simple little hurdle gallops. I'll put like little 18-inch hurdles about maybe 8 or 9 feet apart and just have the athletes gallop over the hurdles. And it forces you, if you're going to land on that leg, it kind of forces you to lengthen that leg. And they kind of get the feeling of it. And it's not a bad place to start as far as like, it gives them an idea of the feel of it. But at some point in time, they have to do it in the actual triple jump itself. And I'll be honest with you, if they have that bad habit, um, it's not always easy. That is something that because it feels so radically different. You're locked into a really fast phase sequence, fast rhythms. Now suddenly you have something nice and long going on. The rhythm is so entirely different that it often takes a couple of practices and a lot of reps before athletes will really be able to time it up correctly. So,
Hmm.
and it's been my experience here is when coaches get to that point that a lot of times they freak out and quit because they're afraid because the athlete's not really getting it right away.
Hmm.
They're afraid maybe I'm saying the wrong thing, maybe I'm not teaching this right or whatever. Actually, you're doing exactly the right thing. It's just a tough spot, and it's just
Yeah.
something that does take effort and does take repetitions.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Matthew, you want to unmute and ask your questions, please?
Yeah, thanks, Boo. I have a kid. He's okay triple jumper. And he gets really nice extension, but it kind of like stops right below the hips, and he can't ever really get like the free leg back. Do you have any thoughts on just like how do I help him? He kind of more pushes it down than like lets it sweep through. And we've talked about it. He understands what he's supposed to do and just
Wait,
can't like
wait,
mechanically.
Matthew, to be clear, we're
Yep,
talking about the free leg in flight during the hop phase.
correct.
And okay, so what's he doing? He doesn't move it back.
Yeah, just never really gets past his hips behind him.
Yeah, well, that's because he's overactive with the other leg. What you're going to have
Okay.
to do with him is you're going to have to go back and cue the hop leg side. And he has to understand that once I push off of that board, like it's not my job to pull that leg through. The stretch reflexes are going to pull that leg through on time. The thing that interferes with that free leg moving backward more than anything else is if the other leg is moving forward prematurely.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's why I use the term limb exchange in the hop a lot because the rate of forward movement and backward movement of those two limbs needs to be balanced to some extent. You know, and if you want to evaluate it, coaches, like uh, take a snapshot of on the video when the knees are together. If the knees are together and they're under the athlete, pat yourself on the back. You've done a good job of coaching it. If the knees are in front of the athlete when they're together, well, then the hop leg is coming forward too early and the free leg is not moving back well enough.
Okay, that's excellent. That's good. Now, if the free leg or the hop leg, I should say, is coming through too fast, do you really, how do you say, or how do you coach slowing it down? Or,
I ask for more backside, feel it more behind you during takeoff. So
okay,
I over cue the backside during the takeoff phase of the jump.
okay, good. So now with this, let me see, we call the free leg now is going into the step phase.
Mhm.
And what are your cues or your thoughts on that?
There's only, to me, if you've done everything right up to this point, step phases normally happen fairly well. But to me, there's one key thing. As you move from hop to step, it's important that the swing movement of that free leg is extended. Like you can't overdrive the knee at that point. What I see happens is if you do that first phase right, the only thing you can really do that'll screw up the second phase is if you drive the knee too hard. And when I say drive the knee, I'm talking about drive the knee versus swinging the leg in a longer extended position. So I'm teaching athletes as they swing that leg, moving into the second phase, keep the foot close to the ground at that point. Now, the triple jump aficionados in the group, you'll argue, well, I see triple jumpers get their knee up on their step phases all the time. Yes, you do, but you don't see it right away. You always see that swing start in a long extended position. And then after they kind of cross the ankle and go past 90 degrees, then you start to see the knee go up. The knee doesn't go up right away. And that's what you have to be able to do. And what happens in my experience is there's a lot of coaches who preach knee lift so aggressively to the point where athletes start cutting off the swing leg. The knee gets flexed prematurely. And if the knee swings forward flex, you don't have any radius to control rotation and you wreck your step phase that way. So that long swinging movement, at least starting with a
Mhm.
long swinging movement becomes important at that point. To me, that's the key to the whole piece.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very good. I haven't heard it explained quite this way. So this is really I can picture it definitely and what we see happen versus what should be happening. Let's put it that way.
A lot of people come to my track and they'll watch me coach and they really freak out when I'm teaching simple hopping and bounding exercises because I'm always teaching athletes to keep your feet close to the ground and don't let your knees get up super high. Like keep your knees a little lower than your hips because it teaches them how to keep the hips up.
Okay.
And it kind of blows their mind that I'm not really preaching knee lift and knee drive and things of that nature. But
Mhm.
it really establishes a lot of good habits, to be honest with you. And when you go fast and you add speed from an approach, the ranges of motion get bigger naturally.
Mhm.
Knees start coming up a little higher like they should.
Now, going from then the step to the jump, do you have any strategies there or is it just
Nothing.
survival?
Absolutely. It's just survival. Yeah. Like, we do our basic hopping and bounding stuff. And if athletes have basic hopping and bounding skills, the second phase and the third phase are really easy, really easy. It's really about doing the things prior to that point. I don't think I ever mentioned anything about the jump phase in a triple jump practice, to be honest with you. I don't know
Yeah.
if I've ever in my life. Almost all of my triple jump practice is based on the last few steps and the takeoff from the board and the conversion from one to two.
So if we go back to long jump now, we've got them in the air. Do you have a preference on hang, hitch, hitch, hang?
No, I really don't. But I do think there are a lot of people hitch kicking that should not be hitch kicking. You know, hitch kicking is a better technique from the standpoint of it's a little better than a hang as far as rotation fighting capability.
Mhm.
When my long jumper comes off the board, I want to, they drive that knee. I want to see that leg extend and move back. And then you throw your hands up in the air. That's a hang technique. If you extend the other one too and do it twice, that's a hitch kick technique. But as long as I see that extension there, I'm pretty happy. Now I have some athletes that kind of gravitate naturally toward hitch kick, and if they're jumping far enough and have enough flight time to execute it correctly, I'm fine with it. But I don't think it's necessarily a better technique for everyone, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I look at hitch kickers, to me, this is me, but to me, you got to be jumping like 25 feet or have a lot of air time in order to really execute a hitch kick. And there'll be coaches who'll argue with me and say, "Oh, I saw this young man or maybe a elite female who did a hitch kick, and she was only jumping 23 feet, only jumping 7 meters." Well, there are hitch kicks and there are hitch kicks. Like in a good hitch kick, you have a long leg and the hands rotate real high, and sometimes with these athletes that really aren't jumping long distances, you don't see the hands get up high in the air. You see short radius and you see a short radius. So if you're not doing the hitch kick right, you'd probably be better off doing a properly executed hang than a poorly executed hitch kick. So I really have a lot of leeway there per se, I'm not the person that really feels that you have to do one or the other.
Mhm.
It was interesting. Coach Telez one time, Coach Telez made everybody hitch kick.
Oh,
He made everybody. And one time I asked him why. And he told me he didn't feel that the hitch kick, I mean, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he didn't feel like the hitch kick was much better than the hang as far as the flight style was concerned. But he felt like if the athletes were going to anticipate running in the air, they were less likely to get long in the last couple of steps. So his whole purpose for the hitch kick wasn't so much because it was a better flight style. He thought that it kind of encouraged better mechanics in the last two steps of the run. I thought that was interesting, and I thought that was very revealing as when he kind of told me that.
yeah, that is. What about the jumper that hangs off prematurely? In other words, they're hanging off a takeoff almost. They're leaning back.
That's not a style. That's a mistake.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, that's not a style. That's a mistake. Those are
Mistake.
people who kind of just punch and drive and normally just kind of pop everything up. Yeah.
Right.
No, yeah. And another thing that's interesting about the whole flight piece, Sue, and you know this, is that athletes do need to understand that if you execute like a perfect long jump, it's not a perfectly balanced ride. Like you're going to feel a little bit of forward rotation. On the best jumps, you are going to have to work a little bit to stay up on them.
Mhm.
The jumps that feel perfect and you never get over rotated, those are the ones that go straight up in the air and land real close to the board. So I think that's important as well. What's funny is sometimes you'll get an athlete who maybe with a previous coach, maybe they were a person who was over rotated all the time, and you teach them and you fix them, and now it feels so good to them because they're not over rotated. But if you recruit the athlete who never got over rotated because they were always too high and they blocked and whatever, well then now that athlete has to learn to feel a little bit of discomfort. So that can be a tougher coaching job, because it's not going to feel as comfortable to them when they perform well. Whereas the other athlete, anything that you teach them is going to be more comfortable than what they were doing before.
Yeah, that feeling uncomfortable, getting to get comfortable to be uncomfortable is a challenge for today's athletes. It seems that
Yes, it
they
is, you know.
don't want to
Yeah,
get out of
but
that comfort zone. I tell you.
yeah, but I'm old school too, you know, like coach, that don't feel right. Well, have you ever jumped 8 meters? No. Well, then how do you know what it's supposed to feel like? Like like you don't know what this is supposed to feel like. You've never done it. So why do you have these preconceived notions about it, you know?
Excellent.
I
That's
mean, when
great.
you've done it, I'll respect everything you say, but up until this point, like you really need to understand that ultimately you have to change, you know.
That'll be my next comeback here. So that's great with that. So, well, let's shift over now to pre-season or middle of the season aches and pains and how to maybe be proactive, or if it happens, how to get them back into condition or get them back into competing right away. And I know you have a an excellent hamstring, let's say, program or rehab type program. Could you share that with us?
Well, I'll share you some thoughts on hamstring. I hear a lot of people tell me I have a great hamstring protocol, but it's really a little more complicated than that, to be honest with you. You know, there are different types of hamstring injuries and they need to be handled slightly different. You know, I think what most people talk about as far as that protocol is kind of what I do when somebody has a acute hamstring pull. But but chronic hamstring issues have to be treated entirely differently. When I have an acute hamstring pull, like the athlete, um, pulls on Saturday and they're going to be at practice on Monday,
Mhm.
what I try to do is I try to get them moving right away. I don't want them stretching. I don't want therapists touching it. I don't want any of that stuff going on. What I want them to do is to execute basic functional exercise, which for track people is running below the pain threshold. So if I pull my hamstring on Monday, on Tuesday I have you out there running. If it hurts to run at 50%, that's your pain threshold. We'll run at 40%. If it hurts to run at 30%, run at 20%. But they have to move. That's the key thing there.
Mhm.
I think the thing that we miss is that how the body actually heals itself. When you have a soft tissue injury, whether it's hamstring, quad, whatever, any soft tissue injury, once the inflammation process kind of starts doing its thing, you start seeing collagen cycling at the injury site. And the collagen application, the proteins that that repair it, has to be governed by something. And it's not governed by DNA, it's governed by functional tension. So in short, I've got this muscle's torn. Here comes this collagen to the rescue to patch it up. Well, if the muscle isn't doing anything, the collagen sticks onto the muscle, makes the repair, and we have scar tissue. But if the muscle is actually exercising on a semi-regular basis or actually moving, well, then the collagen gets a message of how tension is being applied to the muscle. And instead of getting the scar tissue, you get functional muscle tissue in that situation. You see, so if you have a hamstring pull and you don't do anything for a week, that's potentially a week's worth of scar tissue. If you don't do anything for 2 weeks, that's potentially 2 weeks worth of scar tissue. So it's pretty simple. Get out there and do something. Doesn't have to be a lot. Like a lot of the times I'll bring them out there and we'll do like 8 by 40 or something like that. And again, it's just easy build-ups, again, below the pain threshold. We do that today. Tomorrow, it's a little bit faster. Next day, it's a little faster. Next day, it's a little faster. And if you don't do dumb stuff, normally your typical like second degree hamstring pull, it's going to be fine in about 12 days in most scenarios. Remember, the hamstring's a soft tissue. It's got a very good blood supply. So it's kind of wired to heal fast. What happens in many situations is that we're too aggressive with therapies and athletes are stretching it in between sessions and in between reps and whatever. Leave it alone. A little bit of gentle exercise and just let nature run its course. I also don't ice anymore. If we're trying to get all this to happen faster, ice slows things down. So like I don't ice anymore. One little trick that I have used that helps a lot is when they're on their way back and they're getting back and they're kind of in that 80 to 85% healed range. What I'll do often is I'll pull out a sled and I'll have them sprint with a heavy sled. When I say heavy, there's probably about maybe 40K on it or something like that. Maybe 30 or 40K, something like that. Or like 30 for the women. It's pretty heavy. And people think that that's risky, but if you think about it, the sled actually slows them down. So they can work really hard, but they're not capable of really putting the hamstring in jeopardy because the sled doesn't allow them to achieve those dangerous velocities. So what I'll do is we'll start doing the sprinting with the sled. And then from that point forward, every day I lighten up the sled a little bit until eventually they're sprinting with no resistance. And that's how I typically finish up the rehab. It really doesn't help them to come back faster, but they do come back more fit because they can work harder with the sled than they can without it.
Interesting. Yeah, that is good. So you said no ice. Do you have a counter for that, or you just leave them? I mean, no,
No, I just no, just don't ice it.
don't
Don't
ice.
ice it and don't stretch it. Don't ice it and don't stretch it. And this is kind of a joke, but it's very true. Athletes, when they have a hamstring injury, they stretch it incessantly. They're always picking at it. They're all, it's kind of like when you have that sore in your mouth. You touch it with your tongue, and and it hurts, but you touch it anyway. It's the
Yeah.
same thing with the hamstring. They have to understand that, if you stretch it, static stretching basically reboots the whole process, and that's when it turns from a 2 week thing into like a 6 or 8 week thing in those
Mhm.
scenarios.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Any tips on how to fight the physical therapist that wants to, or the trainer that wants to put all these modalities and stretching on them?
Science. I mean, they can't argue science, to be honest with you. So,
That's
I
true.
always go in there totally loaded with exactly why we're doing it that way. And
Uh-huh. Well, that helps. That's good.
yeah.
How
But the
about,
one thing
I'm sorry, go
oh,
ahead.
I was going to say, the one thing that I think we miss a lot is, remember, when you get a hamstring injury, it's not just about the rehab, it's about why it happened in the first place.
Yeah.
And a lot of times hamstring injuries are related to immobility around the pelvis, lack of rotation of the pelvis, lack of rotation in the spine, ankle mobility. These are all things that often commonly trigger hamstring injuries. So when this athlete injures a hamstring and rehabs it, and then they go back and pull it again, we automatically assume, oh, we went back too soon.
Mm.
Not necessarily. We didn't do the rehab right. Not necessarily. You could have done it perfectly, but the problem is you didn't identify why it happened in the first place, and you didn't address the injury cause. The injury cause and the injury are two different things. So
Mhm.
just keep in mind, every injury is not one question, it's two questions. It's not just what are we going to do about it, it's a question, why did it happen? And normally you got to have a plan for both.
Excellent. Because, yeah, cause and effect, we always, whether it be in technique or now in rehab, we always look at the result. We don't always go back to the core issue. Al?
Exactly.
Boo, what if you've got a middle distance runner that has it very high near the buttocks? You know, the and it stays there up, you have a hard time getting
Yep.
that back.
Yeah, when you get that, Al, normally the hamstring injury real high like that, it indicates what type of the movement that's faulty. Most of your middle and lower hamstring injuries, they're associated with the opening of the knee in the gait cycle, whereas the high up hamstring right under the butt there, that's more associated with the hip extension piece of it. So that kind of tells you where the faulty movement is in that regard. The reason why these hamstrings tend to linger so often is that those typically have some type of tendon involved.
You froze again.
Oh, Louisiana internet here. We're gonna have to keep working at it. Well, hopefully he'll come right back.
Ooh, you beat me to it. I was about to say the same thing.
I know this is super important.
I know. There we
I'm
go.
back.
Now
I'm
you're
back.
back.
Okay,
All
I'm
right,
sorry.
go back to high, the high, the
High
high.
hamstring.
What I was saying, yeah, the high hamstring, Al, is almost always related to the hip extension, not the knee extension there, okay? And the reason why it typically lasts so much longer is that there's typically tendinous involvement with it. And tendons just take a long time to heal. They just aren't as good as far as they're not like soft tissues. The blood supply is not there. They take longer. The other thing that's interesting about tendons is that you typically have to load them to a very high level in order to get them to actually heal. And often in these situations, we tend to be a little overly cautious. So a lot of times a good plyometric exercise like an explosive step up or something like that, that can really load that tendon up well and load it up properly, will actually get that injury to move. But gentle exercise that we recommended for like hamstring injuries does not work for tendons. Like tendons have to be loaded to a pretty high degree in order for them to actually change and remodel themselves.
Those step ups on
Like an
box.
explosive step up, almost like to the point of jumping. Yeah.
Okay.
Something along those. And it could be that you have to have some other type of exercise, any type of exercise that will reach it anatomically, but it's got to be something of high load. Like, for example, one time I was working with this sprinter. This sprinter had a hamstring injury with tendinous involvement. And I went through the simple little buildups that we talked about earlier, and everything went great. Everything went fantastic. But then at the end, he's got this lingering tendon pain. Well, we had the MRI. We knew it wasn't a terrible tendon injury, that we didn't have to worry about rupture. So he was a tough kid. So I said, hey, Akane, I need you to sprint this weekend. So he goes out. He's a 10-1 guy. He sprints 10-7. You know, his next race is 10 flat. My point is that if you don't load the tendon, it's not going to do anything. And that you can't really say that about most other tissues in the body. Most other tissues in the body will respond to some extent. Tendons just won't. They just don't care about gentle exercise. So if you rest a tendon for a month, it's going to be just as bad after a month as it was when the injury first occurred.
Please call Houston Franks, please.
Okay. I'm
Call her.
assuming he's having some problems. Okay.
Yes, he's got a little Japanese girl that can't get over the high. And she's a 409 kind of girl, 1500.
Well, not right now. She's not. But Houston has my number. I've learned, Al. I love you, Al, but I've learned not to interject myself into situations where I'm not been requested. Okay.
Well,
So-
I've been interjected, and I need you to take over my interjection.
Jerome, you've got a question?
Yeah, that the loading, would that apply to Achilles as well?
Cost to anything. What I typically do with tendons is when I'm rehabbing tendons, I'm looking at them, I always think in terms of high levels of load. I
Mhm.
prefer to use either sprint-based or jump-based loading in most
Okay.
scenarios. However, if I know or I suspect that this injury is severe and there's a chance of rupture, then I will use isometrics instead of sprint or jump-based loading. So I just want to qualify that, I'm not doing jumps or sprints with everybody in all situations.
Yeah, it's more like a refer more as a tendonitis or tendinopathy.
Well, like I said, I prefer to use the jump-based stuff. Like if it's an
Okay.
Achilles and I feel good about the foot structure and I feel like the
Mhm.
cuboid bone is mobilized like it should be and whatever, I will typically use jump-based rehab. Most of the time, I like to jump going uphill because if you go
Okay.
uphill, the heel is actually
Get an extra
unsupported, so
stretch,
you get
right?
the longer stretch, right?
Yeah.
But again, if my MRI is telling me that there's like a rupture chance here,
Mhm.
then I'm going to do isometrics.
Isometric. Okay.
Mhm.
Makes sense.
Excellent.
Eventually switching into the ballistic loading. Yeah.
How about our other favorite for this time of year, shin splints?
Oh, yeah. Huh? A lot of people shin splints are going away at this time of year. A lot of you high school coaches, because it's finally warming up. So the track doesn't feel like concrete anymore. It's a little bit softer, maybe. But shin splints are always related to foot mobility. Always. You can just about take any shin splint person, and if you take the foot, put in your hand and try to move it and twist it, it'll feel like a piece of wood. Like there just isn't any mobility there. So most of it is about restoring mobility to the foot. The foot operates not just as a hammer against the ground; it also operates as a shock absorber to some extent. And the arches become dysfunctional and whatever. Shin splints are associated with a violent pronation of the foot. Violent pronation of the foot. So if that, when you sprint or run, the foot, you land on the outside edge, and then you smoothly roll to to the inside of the foot. That's what good foot strike looks like. And some people, you'll see that action is far too violent. Those typically your shin splint people. Now, the thing that confuses trainers in my experience, the trainer will look at this athlete, they will see that the pronation of the foot is violent. So they will assume, well, that athlete pronates well. That's not necessarily the case. If that athlete has a restriction in their pronation, what will happen is they'll hit on the outside edge and they'll get stuck there for a second. And when they finally break free, that's when you get the violent pronation. You see, so instead of pronating smoothly. So what I'm saying is that a pronation restriction can also produce the effects of a violent pronation because of that. It's kind of like when you snap your finger or whatever. You catch your finger, it's stuck there, and then when you let go, it goes real fast. It's the same idea there. So that's the key thing, is making sure that the foot is moving correctly and moving well and mobility is being restored. Now, that being said, everybody doesn't have a good foot. I used to believe back in the old days that, you shouldn't have to do anything. God made the foot's perfect, but a lot of athletes just don't have the same foot God gave them, because their mothers didn't buy them shoes when they were kids, or whatever the case may be, or whatever, or maybe they've been trained too hard. I had an athlete one time that was wrecked because of 1,000-meter bounding sessions on a pool deck on cold weather days, so that kind of stuff happens. So my point is that every once in a while, I'll look for mechanical help. What I'll typically do in the tough cases, I'll go to Walgreens and get the cheap Dr. Scholl's arch supports and put them in there. And if I feel like they're helping a little bit, well, that might be a person that might be a candidate for orthotics or something along those lines. So I don't totally rule out some type of help in that regard as well. Another thing, I've been in Europe, so you've probably seen the same, but a lot of times massage, even in the area of the pain, will actually smooth down the fascia in that particular area. It hurts like hell, but I've seen like elite athletes that have shin splints bad, like literally rubbing the painful areas, and they got tears in their eyes, but they know it feels so much better afterwards. But once again, that's just another mobility-based solution in that regard. I think that foot mobility work is something you need to put into your program on a regular basis. What I like to do is I like to get athletes out of shoes. My personal favorite is having them do little jumps in the sand.
Yeah.
Not really intense jumps where the toes have an opportunity to wiggle independently and the ankle can work in 3 dimensions and so forth. But again, coaches, that being said, like, you can be doing a lot of good, really good foot mobility stuff, and you might still have problems. Like, it doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It's just a tricky body part that typically comes to you with a lot of baggage already. One thing, I'll say this because I think we're in good company, but sometimes one of the things that I've used a lot with athletes for shin splints is Arnica montana. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that supplement, but it has very strong inflammation management properties. And just about every jumper I ever had kept an eyedropper bottle of arnica in their bags. And what they would do is they would take a little bit sublingually every day and they would rub a little bit topically. And it really helped a lot. Arnica montana comes from a flower, it's natural. And instead of taking those wicked drugs that sometimes the training room will give them, the Arnica montana is natural. The body can handle it a lot better. And the thing that I really liked about it was how it lasted. Like, you probably experienced this if you're dealing with shin splints. The kid goes to the training room, they give him a PACA naproxen or whatever. It helps a lot. On day 2, it doesn't help much. Day 3, the drugs don't have any effect at all, but the arnica would keep on working, and with no side effects or no problems whatsoever. So it's a supplement that has been really helpful to me. I see somebody's asking in the chat, any particular brand? No, anything will work, but I don't want the creams that have arnica as an ingredient and all the other crap in them. I just want the natural arnica oil that's derived from the flowers. One word of caution is when you get your arnica oil, just take it and taste a little bit. Sometimes they denature it with alcohol, kind of like the vanilla extract in your kitchen or whatever. But sometimes the alcohol is real strong and it might like burn your tongue a little bit or whatever. What I typically do is I have the athletes take about 10 drops or so and just put it under their tongue and they take it sublingually. But if the alcohol content's too strong, it could create a little burning. So if you feel like it's a little strong, just add a little bit of water or dilute it with a little bit of water and have them hold it in their mouth. And there's nothing wrong with using it a little bit topically as well. So that being said, that's a supplement that's really been helpful. The last thing I'll share about shin splints too is that I don't think that you can be successful battling shin splints if you're only looking at one thing, meaning that I mean, it wouldn't be a problem if it had one easy solution. So foot strengthening is a piece, foot mobility is a piece, potentially mechanical help like the arch supports could be a piece, supplementation could be a piece. The piece we didn't talk about are like running mechanics. Like if you're a person who's toy when you run or whatever, good luck keeping shin splints away. You know, you're going to have that. So there's all of these like 5 or 6 different domains and you kind of have to get a passing grade in all of them to kind of keep shin splints under control. And then the one that I haven't mentioned is, do you deload at some point in time? Like I don't have shin splints in my program, you know, for the most part. And it's because we typically train 3 hard, 1 easy. So week 1 of the cycle, we have no shin splints. Week 2, no shin splints. Week 3, we might have a little tiny bit of shin splints coming on, but it's not a big deal because week 4 is the deload week. So if you're never deloading, well, once again, good luck with that also. So I think you got to kind of do all of these things fairly well in order to keep shin splints conquered to some extent.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're getting close to the end, and I've got a few more questions, but audience, do you have other questions for Boo? Because that's where we want to be sure any questions you have are addressed. How do we spell this Amica Montana?
Arnica, Arnica,
Okay.
Arnica.
And
I'm kind of I'm kind of surprised. I'm sure there's probably some people on the call that are probably pretty familiar with it because it's not that odd, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
Um, what was funny is I was coaching at LSU and everybody used Arnica. And then I left for 10 years. I came back and I had to teach the trainers what it was. And I had to go through all of the steps, legal steps or whatever to have it approved for them to use it or whatever. So it was
Uh-huh.
really very common. Arnica, sometimes you see it called Arnica Montana, but it's all the same stuff. And again, buy the one with the that's just an oil in a little bottle with a little eyedropper. That's the one
That's the
that
best. Okay.
a lot of these icy hot kind of products will have a little bit of arnica in them, you know, if you look at the ingredient list, but I like to use just the pure stuff.
The pure.
Mhm.
Is there a drill or drills that you think every jump program should include?
I no, not necessarily, but I do think there are fundamentals that every jump program should teach, you know.
Mhm.
So when I think somebody just put in gallops, you know, so I mean, my everybody probably knows my fundamentals. I like to teach athletes how to skip, you know, skip for height, skip for distance. We do repetitive takeoffs and we do hurdle gallops. Those are like my favorite ones, you know, and those are the ones. The reason why I like those 4 is because I feel like just about every aspect of jump mechanics I'm addressing in one of those at least, and sometimes more. So, is there one particular? I would say that remedial jumping would be the thing you must do before you progress to advanced jumping. Other than that, I have a hard time boiling it down to just one thing.
Hmm. No, well, those are good, several. And of course, our gallops, when we've had Randy on, that's his main stress one that he wants to be sure that we're including. So,
Yeah, to be straight honest with you, the hurdle jumps that I was talking about earlier, they're
mhm.
very similar to like Randy Huntington's like galloping stuff. It's just over hurdles with the same basic movement pattern. It's
Okay.
just organized a little more vertical. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
basically the same.
Excellent. Excellent. If you could change one thing about the way we coach jumps today, what would that be?
One thing about the way we coach jumps today, I would want coaches to be more adventuresome. I think that coaches often fall short in making decisions and using cues that could really help their athletes because they're apprehensive about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or potentially making things worse. And as I said, you got two kind of mechanics: those that are willing to change the oil, and those that'll actually dig in and break down the carburetor. I think there are lots of coaches who are capable of breaking down the carburetor who just are hesitant about it. So, so I think being a little more courageous, a little more adventuresome, and is would be helpful. One of the things, Sue, that I tell this all the time to rehab people. I get, I do a lot with rehabs now, and a lot of my clients and such are physical therapy firms and pro sports teams that do with rehabs. And I always get this, like, if you got an ACL person and it's week 3, what should they? I don't know. I don't know what they should be doing in week 3. Like, it's week, when do you start jumping this jump? Like, I don't know. I can tell you when it often happens, but I don't know. And my point is that a lot of coaches, in my opinion, can't see the whole path, so they don't start down the path. Like, sometimes these answers become so absolutely obvious if you just get started, and sometimes it's hard to get started if you don't have a totally predictable path. And my point is that you can't be that way. You have to be a little bit adventuresome. You have to be, I'm not going to say a risk taker, but you have to be willing to experience discomfort, I guess, in your
Yeah.
coaching, moving into situations that you haven't encountered before. You've heard me say this before, but I always say that the biggest blessing that a coach has are their problems, because every problem you have is an opportunity to improve yourself. Every problem you have, it's like spinach for Popeye. Every time you solve a problem in coaching, you become that much more powerful in that regard. And a lot of people don't see it that way. And I just think that you have to embrace those challenges and be willing to just stick your neck out, put your toe in the cold water, and just move forward and see what happens.
Right, right. No, and like you say, the education and just keep learning, and that's one thing that we've said over the years is, when you think you know everything, you better get out because
Yeah.
you've really cut yourself off, that you need to always learn and always keep pushing your limits as a coach also. Which,
That's the one thing I hated about working at LSU, because like when I worked at LSU, there was kind of almost like a culture there where, like, well, you're at LSU, you should know everything you need to know. Why do you need professional development?
oh
And
goodness.
it bothered me. It wasn't stated, but it was kind
Yeah.
of like an underneath kind of thing. And
Uh-huh.
of course, I resisted, but
Well, and again, any of you that have the opportunity to take any of Boo's courses or his his website has all kinds of materials that you can utilize and it's free, which is nice. And so, we're learning or just getting explanations from him today, which again is so much help, definitely, regardless of what level you're at. So last few questions. Do we have any questions? Some of you have been putting things in the chat. We've tried to address those. And I want to, we didn't talk any about mental or, the psychological preparation because jumps get psychological a lot. Um,
yeah.
do you have any, let's say, short term, or I mean, not long answer type things, but ways that you go into competition with your jumpers?
I think it's all about the structure of the practice environment and the preparation. Like, sports psychologists are very valuable, but they would all be out of work if all athletes approach competition with confidence.
True.
So are you capable of structuring training, structuring workouts in ways that have these athletes actually going and feeling prepared? And if anything bad is going to happen, like, you and the athlete both have an understanding of what's likely to go wrong and how you're going to control it. So, like, if you kind of feel that you're there, then typically you're fine.
Is there a cue that you tend to use more than others when competition?
No, I don't have any particular cue because it would be different for every athlete. But
Sure.
I will say this, that I never brought an athlete to a championship competition or a major competition feeling that they were 100% stable. Never happened. I thought that the best I could ever get was to be like 95% stable. But I was also aware of the one thing that was likely to break down. And I felt like in practice, we had discussed it and come up with a strategy to control it. So I
Mm,
felt like if we kind of went and we were about 90% stable and we knew the one thing that was likely to rear its head, then I felt that that was as good as it got, as it would get.
exactly.
Yeah.
Boo, what is your website address?
My website is sacspeed.com. Sac is SAC, the word speed.com.
Okay, so sacspeed.com.
.com. And by the way, if you hunt around on there, you can email me directly through that website. And
Mhm.
those of you who know me well know that I'm very approachable.
Yes.
Uh, and you feel free to contact me anytime, email me anytime you like. The wonderful thing about email is if I'm free, I'll answer you right away. And if I'm busy, I'll just wait a day, but I'll always get back to you. So feel free. I don't mind. I was so fortunate to have good help when I got started, and I take that responsibility seriously.
Well, we sure appreciate it too, because you pay it forward above and beyond what many people do. So we really do appreciate this.
Well,
So
thank you.
again, thank you all very much for your time tonight. You're getting a bunch of kudos, Boo, in the chat, and I think we all got a lot out of this, whether you're a jump coach or just again a track and field coach, which is what we all should strive to be. So.
This was fun for me, Sue. Interview versus formal presentation. I really appreciate
Well, I didn't want you to have to put something together because I know you've been doing that quite a bit.
it. It was great. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank
And
you.
thanks everybody. Everybody have a good night, okay?
Great. Well, you guys, good luck. Keep working hard and keep checking on Facebook when we have our next session. So thanks again.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Sue.
Boo.
Good night,
Thank
guys.